So thanks very much for the invitation. It is a huge honor to be here. This is one of the foremost places one can have to have a conversation in cybersecurity. And I was just learning from Virgil this. I had forgotten, but the first year that this was launched was the first year of my postdoc, so I had just gotten my PhD. I did not have a paper in the conference. So there you go, all of you have beaten me out, but I have been a lot of other interesting places, and I thought I'd share some of that with you today. And what I'm hoping to do is, A, leave 15 minutes or so at the end for questions, and I've been promised some help with that. But B, help demystify a little bit about what NSA does, give you a perspective on some of the issues globally that I see now from this position of the research director at the agency and looking at the hard problems that we face on the global perspective, but also the sort of thing that it takes to really dramatically scale up cybersecurity to a level where it can influence both major and minor activities. Because that's one of the things that surprised me most when I got to the agency, how very complicated it is behind the scenes. So I will demystify as much as I can, not including the classified stuff, but the rest, and I'll leave some questions at the end so you can ask what you like. So starting out, I'd like to give you just a quick overview what our 3 missions are. People have one perspective of the agency, and it probably ties most tightly to the mission on the lower left, the foreign signal exploitation. So part of our job is to gather information broadly from all variety of signals, to include computer, to support policy-making decisions and so on. So we have a foreign signals exploitation mission that is intended to support the intelligence activities of the agency. The second is something you may have seen more frequently presented in public. That's the cybersecurity mission. It was called the Information Assurance Mission for a long time. That's protecting the systems that are critical to the United States, so the defense mission, you can think of it that way. So it includes everything from protecting codes that are of great importance, protecting individual systems. It's now grown to protecting different kinds of critical infrastructures and also teaming across the agencies in the federal government of the United States in order to support those systems that have a national security requirement. You'll sometimes hear that shorthand referred to as the DODIN as well, the Defense Intelligence Network, or the Defense Infrastructure, but really think about it as we have a role to play directly in the DoD systems and then a supportive role in those things that are more domestic. And then the third one is relatively new, although not that new anymore because the Cyber Command's been around for quite a long time now, is support for Cyber Command's cyber network operations and so on. And that's one of the areas that's most difficult to talk about, but I think it's most important to include because if you think about what underpins those 3 missions I just explained, the 3 different kinds of cyber that you see externally plus law enforcement are represented there. So from this position, we look at the sort of things one might look at from an intelligence gathering perspective, from a defensive position, and then also supporting the warfighter in cyber, which is pretty broad. I listed a few others as well. Military support operations. We are considered an expeditionary organization. We have responsibilities for troops in the field, and so that also adds some additional complexity. There's a difference between defending a network that is stationary and one that is expeditionary, especially when it's expeditionary in a country where you're trying to conduct an operation. So very different kinds of approaches are required there. And then technology transfer, not all of you realize, but I'll give a shameless plug to our Order or TTP office. We do tech transition, we do lots of CRADAs with institutions, and as much as possible we license the technology that the government has invested in. We also do research. So I had an interesting conversation this morning at the breakfast table, and I was asked, do you do any research at NSA? And the answer is A, yes, we do a lot of it. But we don't fund as much research in the traditional ways that probably most of you in the audience are used to getting. And so I thought it would be worthwhile to give you just a couple of minutes explaining what I mean by doing research at NSA. So I'd say most of you are likely getting National Science Foundation grants or DARPA grants. Is that correct? I mean, when I was coming through, that was the rigor. A few of you will have some defense-oriented grants from ARO, places like that. And a few of you will have industry grants. I think that's getting to be a larger segment. But government investment continues to be and should continue to be an important part of how we support our scientists and our researchers. So NSA does play a part there. We do have some investments we make that look a bit like NSF, but largely we don't. What we call our research is mission-oriented research. And that means that every dollar that we invest, actually every minute that we invest, needs to be done with an eye towards having some kind of a positive effect on one of those 3 missions that I shared with you. Now, that positive effect could be discovering that something doesn't work. That positive effect might be letting the outside world, such as some of the slides that I've included are explicitly here because I want to make sure that the science community knows that we consider these to be a problem and worth some of your energy in. But a lot of those are things that we need to use in-house or things that we need to have productized externally, and the research directorate is responsible for that. And that's how I ended up with those other 2 hats you heard. It's why I ended up with the innovation champion role. Innovation is not the same as research. Research tends to be longer term. Innovation tends to be pulling things together towards the last mile. But that's one of the roles. And then the science advisor is to look at the basic science. So mission-oriented research, I bet a lot of you got a picture in your head of that's probably awfully applied. Well, a lot of it is applied, but not all of it. In fact, our sweet spot for investment, both of the staff that I have internally and the fork that we fund with companies and researchers, academics, and other governments externally, tends to be in the 2 to 6 year out position. And one of the few places where we're allowed to look 10 to 20 years out if we need to. There really are some advances in the sciences that need to be done in a classified way or an unclassified way. If you look at information assurance and security enhanced Linux, that type of thing, that needs to be done over the long haul, that it is a long haul, that it takes a long time to get things right, fundamental axioms that need to be addressed, and so on. So while we do have an application in mind, most of our work is actually not applied. So we probably spend no more than 1/3 of our budget, I would say, on those things that are in the very applied element. We are a large organization. The actual numbers and dollars are classified, so I can't put it here, but I will put it in context by telling you that the Research Directorate at NSA is the largest body of in-house researchers in all of the intelligence community. And our budget, modulo those that are spending on pricey things like satellite, tends to follow suit. So we have a lot of people that we work with, and we do a lot of in-house research. You might run into a few of us at external locations like our Laboratory for Analytic Sciences in North Carolina. We have some researchers detailed there. And we started a new program this year where at our 4 cryptologic centers for NSA, we in fact house some of our researchers. So there'll be more places in the country where you could actually go to an NSA site and find someone whose primary job is research. And so I've pictured that here. In terms of our internal structure, we look a lot like a STEM college. So I have, as you might expect, a lot of mathematicians. Many of them work the crypt mission, many of them data science, many of them work some other things. Information assurance, which is the current name, which may change to cybersecurity to better match how we're positioning that area of investment across the agency writ large. We have physical sciences, everything from chemists to a clean room. We have a lot of unclassified work that goes on there, so shameless plug, we take postdocs in the clean room over the summer. A lot of HPC work out of that unit. Telecommunications, which does about what you'd think. They have both classified and unclassified programs. Some of the unclassified ones do Internet of Things. We have a smart house, and a whole floor of their building is open. It's unclassified space, so we have a student program that's housed there over the summer. We do not have a unit number 5 for reasons we won't talk about here. We actually really don't have one. It's not secret. It doesn't exist. R6 is analytics, and that's where we do a lot of the analysis that supports everything from cyber on through the language activities, and then we do a number of other things as well, so innovation to include. So that's enough about that. So when I got to the agency, I should explain the picture. That's not stock footage. That is my hobby. I do that to relax. I have a very tense job. So I literally climb walls to relax. This one happens to be in Spain, and I like the Dolomites as well. So the reason I put it there is that A, it gives me peace to look at myself climbing a wall, and the second is that there's a lot of things I learned as a rock climber that have actually combined very nicely with what I do as research director and what I've learned as a cybersecurity professional, and that is that one of the hardest things about getting new ideas into practice is scaling up. And also the environment in which you're doing it. So as a climber, I do a lot of practice in my hardest things in the gym, climbing practice, a nice rope. There's lots of padding underneath. If I fall, it's not such a big deal. There's people that can take me to the doctors. It's nice and simple. So I can try a lot of things, lean in there and practice, test the craft. But when it comes to where I am now, we're working mostly in the real world, We're working, actually, I do not have a picture of myself doing what Honnold did, but a lot of it's more like his free climbing. You've got to get it right. There is no net, and you don't have a lot of room for practice. So you need to have your research organization taking a look at things, but you have to have an eye to how do you take the issues that you have and put them out in the real world, where in this case there's climate to deal with. In our case, there's environmentals of other kinds as well. So how do you scale up those great ideas that are in the research labs and bring them outside in such a way that they're still effective? I actually climb about 3, 4, 5 grades harder on the inside than on the outside because the difficulty of climbing inside versus the outside, and I would say the same is true for most cybersecurity ideas. A lot of really good ones fail in their initial instantiation, take several run-throughs, and before you get them right to work in the outside world, which is why it's such an advantage to us at the NSA, standing and falling on needing a 5 to 7 year technical advantage over adversaries to have an in-house unit. It gives us longer to get things right and work things in tandem. So to start with scaling up, I want to give you a context of what I'm thinking about when I'm looking at scale. I have deliberately taken all the country names off of this. That's not for clearance reasons, classification reasons. That's because we are an international audience, and if you had my counterpart from any of the other nations here, they would likely say the same kinds of things. They just change the different names of the countries underneath that. So let's just look at this as a universal issue that nations have. Nations now, when they think about contending for either political gain, for land, for resources of any kind, for economic leadership, for anything that nations contend with or partnership around, think about cybersecurity. When I was a graduate student, this was not true. Right now, every world leader at least believes that they understand the cybersecurity problem. And they're expected to have people around them that in fact do and can give them good recommendations. And most nations have got some kind of a cybersecurity strategy that they use to take themselves forward. And in order to pull together, they think about cyber as a tool in these many different ways. And they might think about it either on a defending against someone, that would be the cybersecurity information defense side, against some nation that's wanting to employ these, or they might want to employ some of these from an intelligence standpoint or from a cyber warfare standpoint. So you'll see some nations that when you look at their plans, they appear to be fitting more the category up in the left, more aggressive, pushing forward, thinking of something that's aiming directly towards a dominance activity. Others that might be more sensitive to their appearances in the external, so you might see a move forward and a move back. And when you're thinking through how you're defending in the cyber realm against those kinds of adversaries, and this was a big aha for me, the things that we used inside of the research lab were helpful in saying nation state, long-term thinking, lots of resources. But if you don't start to put that in the context of there are individual personalities that are running those strategies with different other things contending for their time, you're not going to really understand what the adversary activity is. So scaling up really does mean thinking things through differently. And just as I mentioned that we've got a long-term internal agenda, most nations now are advancing to have longer than a 6-minute thought process that goes into how one develops their cyber strategy, that they might have very long-term cybersecurity strategies. And so those things that we used to use that work nicely with cyber crime, where you look perhaps in the month or so, you might look at your logs the month or so in front of a break-in and see that there were signs of an adversary tickling on the outside. You might be less likely to see that now because with a long-term strategy, you're probably looking at a supply chain investment, something like that. So you'd have different ways, different things you'd be concerned of. And so a near-term assessment that you don't see threat activity is not really a good indication that there isn't any. It may be in a place you're not looking. So the first scale is to think the global perspective. The second scale has to do with all of those humans and organizations that they work with in the list. And so I've given you this one. Again, thinking through some of my roots, I used to think, and probably this was more true in the earlier days, not for the professional organizations. I think the agency had a larger presence than I ever was aware of until I got there. But I used to think more of solitary actors who were the analysts. So in the day we looked at, we were usually thinking through a very smart cybersecurity analyst who would be the sysadmin generally, who would look at the system logs or the protector or a small unit, and they would work with their own knowledge to gather information. They would assess that knowledge, and they would often be the one that implemented the defenses. And then that got larger, and you started to have organizations, and you start to see an organization such there. So you've got a lot of different people working together on that problem. Well, where we are now in terms of the intelligence analysis profession, which bleeds over into how we deal also with cyber defense, is you have a lot of different organizations that each have certain segments of the problem assigned to them. And each one of them will have their groups of people who are doing analysis and collection, and they'll have different who are dealing with defense. And so it's much more complicated, the intelligence analysis profession. And so when you have a room like this, you're actually looking at a lot of different kinds of professionals, quite often sitting together in near proximity, looking at all those various things that affect their job. We've found, and most find, that if you put people with different backgrounds in proximity to each other, especially if they offer a diverse perspective, you get a better result. The same is true, definitely true, in the cyber defense mechanism. And this is a little bit idealized picture of our older cyber NTOC, where we did our Threat Operations Center work in conjunction with some others. Somewhat idealized, and as I say, we've moved to a new facility as of this summer. I don't have permission to show the new facility. I have a stylized document of that one too, though. But here's where we used to be. When I went to the agency, I used to spend somewhere between 3 and 4 hours, maybe longer, sitting on Thanksgiving, chatting with the operators to find out what they did, and things have changed quite a bit. But what hasn't changed from there is professional 24/7, people trained in their craft, lots of specialization, and handoffs needed, and sophistication of the handoffs, and a good understanding of turf. And as well, at this point, there was interaction with the command. Nowadays, it might look something more like this, where you'd have more formalized desks for the other organizations that you're working with. So just think about something like perhaps a critical infrastructure threat. It's clearly useful for a critical infrastructure threat to have some connection back to other kinds of organizations. DHS having some engagement with the internal domestic threats that they handle at the agency, and then vice versa, and then FBI dealing with law enforcement. And each one of those organizations has a kind of data that it's allowed to collect and share in a limited fashion with others. Now, most of you are probably familiar with compartments, right? Compartments in security, classification levels. My day seems divided into compartments. Everybody at my organization has a TS-SI clearance, so TS and special compartments. Access pretty much as a rule of thumb. You can't hardly have a conversation without that. And from there, we divided into the different compartments that control the different kinds of information. These other organizations are similarly positioned. And so one of the tricks here, in terms of the sharing that you'd like to have going on with all those different players, is that we can't just, this space you could think of as our analytical space, intelligence collaboration space, where some are doing foreign intelligence production, others discovery. Discovery would be if I have a question, I want to see if something's happening. Foreign intelligence production would be I'm going to tell you if something did happen, a little different nuance, a little different space. Access on the left is how you got the data. Customer on the right, that's the one who's going to ultimately receive it, and then people that handle it. That's not a flat data space. That is something that's also deeply and carefully tagged, because it may be that those are working, for instance, at NSA, can share not everything with those at the FBI without some kind of transformation of that information and vice versa, because there are some things that they might not be cleared to see until you made it changed or you got authorization for it. And on the other side, there's things that we're not authorized to see, particularly involving the US persons. DHS similarly. And so the complexity of putting the data together in order to have a collaborative process like this is another really critical piece of scaling. And this is something I don't see discussed as much in academia. It's one of the ones I wanted to highlight. It's not that glamorous, thinking about how do I deal with compartments, but just thinking about at our nation alone, all of the different names and badges I put up there, they all have different kinds of compartments and information that needs to be shared in a rapid way. Scale that up to a collaboration amongst nations against a common cause in an area that you might have to react quickly, and you can see that having the ability to share information, understanding of the compartments, being protective of what needs to be protected, but fast enough in order to get the results done in cyber, with cyber time operations like this, is really critical, especially if you're looking at data-driven types of activities. Really understanding how you can quickly get at information in this kind of an area is really important. And of course, this looks neater than it in fact is, because naturally you don't want all your eggs in one basket, which means you've got multiple locations and backups and COOP plans and all the rest. and training and transitions of personnel. So scale in the environment of the globe is complicated. Professionalizing cybersecurity is also meant dividing up the task from what might have been one person who is able to carry out many of the functions to this. Just an aside, those of you who know me know I like to lean in and get information that I'm allowed to release. It is not always easy. We have to talk about the risk, reward, benefit. This slide includes something that I've had for a little bit and a couple of extensions, because I do think when something is unclassified, it's nice to share it with the audience so you can see. So feel welcome to snap a shot of that if you want. Not that you need my permission, but wanting to show you how we might think through the professionalizing of the information that might be objective or that is used. The upper right hand for you looks at what kinds of things that a person who's planning a kind of operation might need to know. When you're planning something in cyberspace, you very rarely are going to operate up into perfect knowledge, absolute truth, absolute knowledge of event, no uncertainty. That's very rare. So you might say you'd like to never take an action without that, but you're not going to take very many actions, and you're not going to take them swiftly. And then there are areas at which you would not be willing to take an action. So this shows where there might be an intelligence gap that's unsatisfactory in terms of the collection quality, so you might not even like the information you've got. And so somewhere on that chart, when you're thinking through what you're going to do next with intelligence that you have, is the sweet spot that a decision maker is going to choose. And so if you're responding to cyber or not, there you go. So this is apparently a very popular slide. Good. It's a little work to get it for you. In terms of the activities on the bottom, I don't know that I've ever shown this in type that was big enough to see. I had it at one point up and didn't get to it in an earlier talk, but I wanted to show it to you here. It is not, in the movies, that sit down and you hack through and you've got it. Life is not like that if you're trying to work on a global stage. And this is a notional way that one might go through the different stages of, let's just say, finding things that are interesting. I can't go into much more depth than what you see on the slide, but I think it's interesting to at least think about that there is always a planning stage that one needs to have. There is always a preparation stage, and then we go on through with an ongoing process and an effect. Upper left-hand corner. I won't go through this in great and gory detail because I can see that, well, I can see I'd run out of time. But I'll identify a few. It's probably worthwhile to mention that this includes both the net warfare aspects and the information assurance and the analysts on one big wheel. So I rather like that slide. And it includes around it some of the components one needs to have if you're thinking through a cybersecurity profession in an area that has those three goals that we do. So hardening US networks is absolutely critical. The more you can get good hygiene on a system, the more likely it is that your advanced cyber defenders or your cyber warriors will A, be working against the right target, but B, will not be wasting their time and miss something important because of the noise. So hardening US networks, and also you don't want them broken in. There's other good reasons as well, but when I'm thinking about nation state as opposed to crime, it's really important for that too. Understanding how to develop that intelligence. Once you get that, it's not enough to just collect information and then dump raw information in front of someone. It's a highly, highly developed field that takes a look at identifying how to present information to policymakers and decision makers that really understands the nuance, and that needs to be worked on the cyber side as well. So there's a lot of things there. I do want that previous slide. Backing up. Hello, I'm just impatient. I'm on cyber time, and this is a click behind me. So you hear this all the time. I'm not going to belabor the point, but this, in the context I've just given you, it's not just the needle in the haystack. It's fields of haystacks, and it's countries with their own fields of haystacks, and it's people trying to burn down the haystacks, and it's people making things look like haystacks that aren't haystacks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the data volume is a huge issue, and there's a lot of different things, a lot of different research that needs to go here. Don't read too much into my putting in blockchains, I took this from a particular researcher and that's their particular path. That would not be always my mechanism of choice. I'm uneasy about the 51% attacks in that space. Again, nation state, you can spend a lot more time laying groundwork. Characterization of the information. This is something that is, I think, worth highlighting for this audience. Again, I mentioned it's not enough to put the raw information out there. It needs to be put forward in a way it can be understood. You can run afoul of psychological principles and make huge errors or entice policymakers inadvertently into making huge errors if you anchor them to bad conclusions. So something as simple as the order in which you enlist the likelihood of an event can make a big difference here. And so there's a lot that goes into deciding how do you put the pieces together when you're presenting them, but also how you take those things you got from the haystack and making them findable by others. And then visualization, untangling the hairball, I'll say a bit more in about that. So all of those things need to be thought of, again, as I said, in this context, very large-scale operations. I have a bit of a pet peeve with visualizations. I think visualization is a hugely important field, and I am just delighted people continue to work in it. So when I say I've got a bit of a pet peeve here, it's not about the area, it's an important area. The issue I have is, again, gets back to the scale question, and that's why I've included it in this section. Very often, when people come to me and want to show me their research and want us to take it up, or when they come to our operational folks and they want to show them research and they might call me in or some of our researchers to talk about it, their fundamental mistake has been made by the presentation. So I'll save you some time and tell you what that is quite often the visualization that's presented does not match the kind of decision maker that is supposed to consume that visualization, or it doesn't scale to the size of the organization that you want to show. So if I were to use a graph like this and try to show every single DDoS attack, you know what that would look like from every nation? It's unmanageable. And I have had people who've come to me with things like this, and they've got their 50 or 100 or 10,000 or what have you and boiled it down, but it doesn't work when you go to that scale. This kind of diagram actually doesn't help for the DDoS detection. This kind of diagram is better if you can nail it down to, I think I see some adversary moving through space like this, where the space is the cyberspace associated with a country, not necessarily geophysically located. So when you think about a visualization, it is really important to consider what kinds of questions will be asked of that, and is it going to be helpful in that regard. So this might be good for certain sorts of things. Down on the bottom are different kinds of activities. This is the sort of diagram we might put up in a big threat operations center. That's more showing those things that would be specific to the IT people. So you might have your firewall alerts for your particular network that you're concerned, and click on that and you see those at the bottom. And then across the top you can see where your firewall is part of the big place. So you need to have some balance there, and I don't want to harp on that too much more, but I want to really mention that. Also, the time to compute and to the right people at the right time. We're generally speaking very lucky in our leadership, particularly our leadership of military at the NSA, and so they can learn some very complicated technical things. But the last thing I want the director of NSA, the DERNSA, to be doing under a tight time frame with a cyber attack is for him to try to figure out what 5 filters he needs to put in to get this diagram to say what he wants. He needs the strategic picture right away. So that needs to be available to him so it's easy to work with. At the same time, I don't want to have the low-level operators who are trying to fix a particular system and defend it against some kind of live adversarial attack at a high level to have to wade through all of this with lots and lots of clicks to get to the data they need. So thinking about the time it takes to get to what you want is important, and what the display area is and how big the wall is. Another area I wanted to highlight here has to do with anticipatory versus forensic thinking. Now, hopefully that's not boring to this audience. You might have seen this sort of thing before, but I remember when I was going through school and in many of the conferences I've attended in the last couple of decades, the focus has tended to be on forensic because it tends to be tied to more law enforcement. My world is more about anticipatory, thinking about what might happen. And they're generally things we seriously don't want to have happen, so it is not an option to let some of it happen over here and another here. Let's see if this nation, we'll let this just keep on going, and if that nation where we didn't intervene doesn't topple and the one where we did intervene does, I mean, that's bad. So the future isn't here yet. Often you don't want certain futures, so there really is no good ground truth in large enough volumes to use some of the machine learning techniques you might learn in other areas. So you have to use other kinds of options when you think about anticipatory kinds of thinking, things that might happen when you're looking at the global stage. Also, plausible futures, and this gets back to my ordering and the anchoring perspective we have when we look at something first. Plausible futures that you have a personal connect to can distract from the impactful futures. Often if something's plausible, we've thought about the defenses for it already. And so you don't need to put as much attention on the truly most plausible, because you probably have a coup, an operating plan that will let you recover from that. But the possible but somewhat implausible, i.e. the things that a nation might do if it invested a lot of time, those do deserve a lot of attention. And so it's very important to make sure that we don't stick with the things that are familiar, and we make sure that the impactful futures are the ones you look at. Again, getting back to my rock climbing example, if you are going to hit the ground with a particular move, you might choose not to make that move. You might choose to go a different direction. And so if it's an impactful future, you really want to think about that move and make other choices, and the time constraint and so on. And the prediction is going to lead to action. We've used this sort of approach. Stories are nice for this sort of thing, because generally when you're talking about futures, you're wanting to explain something to a national leader. So there you go with that. I know I'm too much with the metaphor on the climbing, but it makes me happy. Blurring the lines of technical, line is the line you climb when you go up. Human and technical challenges. So for this one, I had a little bit of fun, and I popped up an old slide from 2011. It really wasn't a new slide in 2011, but I think it's still true. At that point, we had just gotten in the early 2000s, the geeks were really winning because we had lots of small companies, and Silicon Valley was a thing. I know some of you weren't in school at that time. I think most of you were born. But there was a time when geeks didn't rule the earth. But then they started to, and cyber geeks in particular. And then the social sciences were being pushed a bit to the side. And so there became a point, and it was single digits early in 2000s, where it became really clear we needed a lot more work in that area. And so this idea of coping with uncertainty and how do people manage that, assuming breach, which changes your way of doing defense, observing of human behavior was important. What's the ROI for bot herders? You can tell this is an old slide because I've said bot herders and not something else. Persuasion, skills, and marketing. I think I can take a little credit for at least having foreseen the future, but I think a lot of us did. So those things are all really important parts of our discipline nowadays, and those need to be part of what we do at that level. The oldies but goodies still work. People have just gotten a whole lot better at them. I'm not going to go into this, but in 2015, 96% of the executives couldn't tell the difference between real email and phishing email. Now, at that time, there was a lot less excuse for that. But nowadays, I have seen some really classic, exceptionally good phishing emails. And again, there's the difference between what can be done against an executive that, when in this case, often cybercrime, has done a lot of planning to understand their habits and particulars in people, and what was done with the old, please send me $1 million because it's a deposit on the 10 million I'll send you back, and that sort of thing. So clickbait, phishing, deepfakes, and those kinds of deception are really born of this, and the adversarial success rate remains high when they want it badly enough. The caveat is because there's been a lot of progress in winnowing out the chaff. Has anybody ever, well, I guess some of you may have heard Josiah's talk. In general, people don't tend to worry about hacking being stressful, because in general at a cyber defense conference, you're wanting to say that's great. And so yes, when I put my defender hat on, I'm really glad that hacking is stressful, and I'll show you a slide where we try to make it as stressful as possible for them. But we did a study. This is an example of something we did internally. We have a classified version of it, but Celeste and Josiah published this externally for others to use. We looked at some of the network operators, and by this I mean our hackers, ours and those we have access to, and we identified the kinds of stress that shows up in their environment. And this is kind of an interesting thing to think about from the standpoint of whether you're managing a team of that type, whether you're running a red team and you want to make sure that your red teamers remain fresh, or you're looking at how long can you expect the cyber attackers against you to be at their best. And things like cognitive workload are huge for this audience. The pressure to pull through at all costs is huge for this. So deep personal engagement at the high end, high cognitive load of all the variables that need. This is an opinion, not a scientific fact, but in my opinion, watching people, it seems that it is harder to hand off a cyber hacking operation midway than it is to hand off a defense. We've gotten pretty good at handing off defenses, although that's still difficult, especially if there's not a lot of you trained. But on the other side, that would be a little harder. And so we've done some work looking at that, what you can do to help reduce some of these issues when you're supporting a team of that type. It's worth mentioning defense is stressful too. I didn't put up a study on that because we started with the other. There are more people who've looked at the stress level of defenders. But again, when you're in a field that has a constant uptick on the total number of attacks and the kinds of attacks just get more interesting and worse to the right, and when the new things that one can attack can increase and they go through the cycles faster. By cycles faster, I mean if you look at what happened with network attacks, there you have the lighter weight, you infiltrate, you have the next level where you are better at gaining access and retaining it, you have the more destructive, so there's a tick up in terms of difficulty. If you plot the different kinds of attacks, they go up. If you look at critical infrastructures, the uptick on how quickly people got from the least impactful to the worst was faster, and with Internet of Things, pretty much a lot of those devices are born with the flaws inherent. And social media as well falls into this category now, in my opinion, of things that there's different kinds of attacks that have become more sophisticated, but you retain the others. And of course, any savvy attacker is going to learn from the past, so they've looked at what others have tried. So those are there. We are somewhat less good at designing in those things we think will actually support cybersecurity. Shameless plug, go listen to the Ghidra release of research's product. Ghidra, it is a reverse engineering tool, so I'll give you that. I'm down to 10 minutes so that I'll be able to keep some time for questions, so I'll flip through these pretty quickly. Defense and deception is an area that's interesting. Moving targets has become advanced enough. If you move things about your network around enough, it's harder for an adversary to attack it, especially if you're working in an open network. There is a command and control issue, though, and again, think back to all of those different potential partners in a network warfare situation or even in protecting a very large company. You do need to deal with command and control in a different way if you've got moving target, particularly if it's autonomous. Coping with volume, everybody goes here. AI and ML, if you say AI, ML, and cybersecurity in a sentence, and you can probably get it funded by somebody. I've literally, never mind, I want to use the time. So what I did want to highlight, Odie and I like what we're doing in the IC better than that. We actually didn't call it AI. We called it Augmenting Intelligence Using Machines, which is more specific. It's aimed at the teaming and augmenting. I wanted to highlight a few things, particularly the secure procurement of AI-related capabilities. So secure of all capabilities, but especially AI. That means there's a supply chain for software that needs to be dealt with. AI activities secured against adversarial actions, another biggie. And that's a bigger picture, so nothing new there. This, you've all seen this picture. This I think, is probably first going to be solved or addressed in the context of autonomous vehicles. Because we don't want the neighbor kid, instead of taking over the Roomba, taking over the local visualization systems and tweaking the street signs. I had been poo-pooed a little bit when I talked about how much of an issue adversarial AI was a couple of years ago, but please take this one seriously. And resilient AI is definitely going to tie to what we might do with networks. And this one, again, deepfakes is everywhere and critical. So I think I can get through the next 5 minutes, this next section, and there's one that I'll save for another talk after it. I wanted to talk to you a bit about how one puts together a research agenda on the scale that I'm working now in cybersecurity, and what a difference it makes in how you think about things. So I used to use this slide quite a bit, and this is a good one in terms of explaining, or when you want to explain why you've used a research agenda, which is often why I would use this slide. often internally to help people understand why we needed to make certain kinds of investments. This one was aimed at showing people all the different kinds of things and information that needed to be protected in a place like the Department of Defense or NSA or across government. In partnership with DHS, you have these others, and how complex and how many different kinds of information. And so what that got were a lot of really good investments in the protection of things and information. So this slide is really good at looking at investments in things and information. We got, I would say, more savvy in how we talked about this, because it's not really addressing just things and information. It's who are the adversaries and the what. So the what that people have is the hospital. They're not, most of us want the hospital secure. We don't want to be thinking about the specific IT. Well, some of you will be wanting to think about the specific IT, but when you go in as a patient. And so the who and the what, this again is still too high level because it tends to aggregate all nation-state actors in one place, and that doesn't do it justice, nor hacking groups and vigilante groups and malicious insiders and the rest. They're different scales. But this is still another useful thing, and when one invests along this line, you tend to get results that are more specific, that let you look at the threat landscape, and so that's very useful. And I wanted to share you another one, though, so I want to motivate it first. When you take off your cybersecurity researcher hat, if you ever do, when you go home and you think about your neighborhood, your families, when you talk to your relatives, they are more apt to be worried about the thing on this page. We didn't motivate a huge amount of home security with the fear, uncertainty, and doubt of a cyber terrorist leveraging your home computer. We got some of that. There's been improvements, definitely, but it didn't really raise the bar as high as it might have. It didn't strike home in most people's heads. They're welcome to anything I have, or I'm insured, tended to come out. When people began attacking the baby monitors and having the ability to yell expletives at newborns, that started to get more attention. I'm not saying that was a good thing, because I'm not sure it still got the attention that it needed. We still are releasing cameras of this type so that when I needed to get a camera, when my husband was ill and wanted to have a little privacy and not have a nurse in the room, I had to choose between not ceding to his wishes or getting him an insecure Bluetooth device, and in that case, I opted for the Bluetooth. It was worth more to me, but it was a weight. And some of these others, the Roomba that can see better, well, if you can see better and it routes back, anybody could be looking at you through your vacuum. And then other things like civil liberties, social justice. The one on the right is an example of something done really nicely. It's sort of the high end of how one combines security and privacy. That's a picture of how you might monitor relatives who are in some kind of advanced care situation. They're able to, maybe elderly, maybe me after I get even more gray, and we'd like to have our privacy, so we don't want you to watch us, but we'd like you to know if we're lying on the floor and need help. And so this is a way of you put stick figures in and represent giving privacy by reducing information as an improvement on security. So this is the sort of balance that needs to be taking place now, protecting the privacy, the social justice things that need to be dealt with in terms of the big data handling and how one uses that for the different areas, and all of that working together so that organizations and individuals are complying where they should, and we're protecting the things we need to protect. It's not just about the things and the information now. We think about the people, And so I'll leave you with this slide, a little fanciful. I'm a fan of using Maslow's hierarchy of needs in conversations. That's one of the cool things about the agency. I can go to an agency board meeting and talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs being under attack, and they'll look at me and give me 5 minutes to explain what I mean by that. And what I mean is when you think about some of the bleeding edge of the kinds of attacks we see nowadays, a lot of them started with the basic physical needs, critical infrastructure attacks on the banking systems, and so on. Some of the ones I've just given to you have more to do with the safety and the privacy of the people we care about. So it's another level up in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a hierarchy of basic needs with the one on the bottom meaning the most fundamental, and the ones at the top, depending on how you read it, more enlightened or more impactful or more self-actualized, however you want to think about it. Many of the concerns people have about deepfakes have to do more with social identity and belonging and self-esteem, though, than these other things. So if you have a picture of Deb Frincke doing or saying something that Deb Frincke doesn't believe, that's not an attack on my information, because it's not my information. That's an attack on me, but what about me is it? It's my self-esteem. It's my belonging to the group. And so if you begin thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it starts to get more safety involved. And that's a long ways from thinking just about CIA, and I decided to spell it out so you wouldn't get confused. Confidentiality, integrity, availability, about my sister agency. I know you know what CIA is in this context. And so these are the sorts of things we need to begin thinking about. So with that, I think I've allowed at least a few minutes for questions. And I'll go ahead and thank you for your patience with the talk. And we've got, what, 15 minutes for the audience? All right.
Okay, thanks a lot for a great talk. So yeah, it was very interesting. And I have one question on that. You tell us a wonderful story of how do you care about security from the public sector's perspective.
Could you repeat his question?
So public sector's perspective. So I want to ask you that what kind of your insights can be shared by the private sector, or what doesn't?
Okay, so there are quite a few. This one clearly. And nations do have social identity and belonging and so on. So private sector has to deal with a different category of attacker, but sometimes they're also dealing with nation-state attackers. So if you are in our defense industrial base, so your industry has to do with supplying critical parts to a defense institution, either here or if, really any nation, or if you're in the finance industry and you are a part of the critical infrastructure, you have a lot of the same kinds of concerns. And in fact, when you look at particularly the financial industry, while their diagram of their ops center won't look exactly like this, they will have something like that, and there's significant information sharing that takes place. So when you think about a broad-scale nation-state or patient attacker, when there's significant resources under protection, or when there's high impact or lots of money, you can expect the patience that you get from a nation state. Where you'll see something different is if you're going at those things that are more critical to specifically a nation that doesn't involve industry, and it's hard to find those nowadays. But you often would not be the main objective, you might be a pass-through. So from the standpoint of a company, the hard part is a mom and pop store might actually find itself a pass-through in some cases as a way to leverage access to somebody who works, for instance, at the defense industrial base and has access to high-end security. And so that would be a way to gain an unwitting insider by attacking that mom and pop, getting at their Fitbit, going on into the area afterwards. You can't wall it off completely. In terms of what it's reasonable to expect industry to do, that's a different conversation. I would worry more in that area about cybercrime myself, unless you're directly touching one of the critical infrastructures.
Hi, Deb. It's the other Deb.
Oh, hi.
So,
Good to see you.
Hi. So I have a question for you. One of the things we see is that now many companies, large companies that work internationally, for example, in the information sharing space, for example, seem to be in a position where maybe nation states are interested in sort of attacking one another on a playing field that's actually involving the company resources, right? So, so the Facebooks, the Googles, and so on. Any thoughts, and you talked a lot about coordination among different government agencies. What do you see as the opportunities for companies that are trying to defend and not be part of a social cohesion attack, for example? How do they interact with different nation-state agencies in the US and other places to try to not be part of that, to try to be the neutral place where these things don't, they're not the fighting ground for nation states. How do you do that?
I hear you. So there's a very unpleasant truth behind that last bit, is that I really get and understand and wish that our industries, our academic institutions, and the rest would not be part of cyber warfare, that it would be possible to say that those are the critical infrastructures, power grids were all totally off limits. But if you think about the history of warfare in humankind, farmers have died in their fields for a long time. And tanks drive over villages. Nobody can be completely exempt. Now that said, so there's, I think that we should aspire to that, but that I think is more in the nation of a more peaceful globe, to be honest, where we have fewer kinds of inequities and then attacks related. There's another piece that comes into play when we talk about social media, and I'll highlight that because the problem is we've got to deal with information that someone's posting, and that in the United States gets at freedom of speech and our liberties there. So anti-vax, free speech, people who are anchored to truths about anti-vax that are scientifically shown not to be true. So do we require social media companies to make changes so that they put a scientific validity test? And where do we stop when we begin doing that? Do we look to them to do this voluntarily when an inequity or a problem is brought up and hope that their wish for justice and support of their customers or their moving away of their customer base, i.e. the people that sell the ads, I know that we're the product. So the problem with government doing that is that you're asking a government to make a decision that I don't think the American people have decided on, let alone the globe. So I'll put those aside too. There are some bright spots with collaboration. The thing that is an opportunity space now is there is so much more maturity in the understanding of the cybersecurity landscape at large companies anyway. And while we don't have by any means enough cyber professionals, you can find people who can have sensible conversations on all sides of the issue. So finance industry has done a fantastic job of sharing information back and forth regarding how some banking systems in particular can be protected. Similarly to what was done with airbags in cars, that we're now ripe, I would say, as a globe to begin thinking about those kinds of defenses. Something I find very heartening and I'm really proud of is that at our agency, despite our having the three missions, that our information assurance defense outweighs. TIE goes to the information defense. TIE goes here. And so people are recognizing that the effect of leaving open a cyber flaw can be so detrimental that you have to have a significant good in order to be willing to allow that to occur. And so I think that's a possibility. Now, who leads that charge? That's difficult. So I've seen it work across government, and in some spaces it works very well. I've seen it work even in social media. I've seen some cases it's worked very well. I've seen it work as industry-only consortiums. Sometimes that works even better because they've got quite common interests, and then they can appeal to the government in those areas that hit nation state. So that, I'd say, is the opportunity space, and most likely it's a result of the hard work of folks like the ones in this room to develop enough people that we've got enough to have that conversation sensibly. Because you really couldn't when we were starting out finding enough sophistication on both sides to have a sensible discussion. Do we have time for one more? Are we?
Okay. Thank you again for your talk, and this slide is perfect for my question. I'm just wondering how you and your colleagues are coping and functioning in today's environment where your boss, basically the president, is either dismissive or denigrating your work and ignores your conclusions.
So you are asking me as a professional how I want to talk about my boss in public. So something that's absolutely critical, so joking aside, something that's absolutely critical about being an intelligence professional, the profession I have now, I cannot be partisan. You do not want a partisan intelligence agency. You want your intelligence agency to do the best job it possibly can in all those pieces that we talk about, collecting the information and turning it into facts that we hope that others will look at and make good decisions on. We collect and support information for our troops to make sure they're effective in the field. And we do our level best to ensure that we've got a strong cybersecurity infrastructure, information assurance, cybersecurity pristine, with the caveat I just gave you that in some cases, right? That's where I have to stay focused. So I hear your question. It is not the first time it's been asked, but that's my answer. I am a professional. I do my job regardless of partisan. I do it. My oath is to the Constitution. That's where it stays. So that might be the right place to end. Thank you for your patience in the questions.